What is up, everybody? Isaac here with Civil Engineering Academy. Excited to be with you here today on another podcast episode. Today, I bring my brother Mark back on. He's a regular, and I enjoy his conversations with me, and we'll continue to have more regular shows with him in the future. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about salaries, specifically the disciplines that we go into in civil engineering. I went to a conference this last week of this recording and had an interesting conversation with some coworkers about just salary levels and different disciplines and even sub-disciplines of civil engineering that we can go into, and kind of the surprises that are out there with salary levels that a lot of engineers in school don't realize what people can make in those different areas. So today I wanted to bring him on and talk about each sub-discipline and really kind of hammer out some offshoots as well of those disciplines, and just talk about salary levels as according to the information that I researched. So having said that, it's going to be a great episode. I think you're really going to enjoy it if you care about salary, which most people do. And I think you really enjoy it. So before we begin, though, there is one thing I do want to announce, and that is here at Civil Engineering Academy. I've created a course and working on a course and developed a free cheat sheet for people. If you're ever interested in creating a side gig, which I know a lot of engineers are, because typically a lot of people don't get a full bonus, they don't get a full raise. And so I've developed a course to really help people learn how to make a side hustle. If that is of any interest to you, go to engineertoentrepreneur.net and go get a free cheat sheet that I created. Go sign up there and grab that free cheat sheet. And I'll teach you how to create a side gig for yourself. And that is engineer to entrepreneur. That's the number 2 .net. Go check that out. So having said all that, let's get to our interview with Mark. Excited to share this with you. It's coming right up. All right. Welcome to the Civil Engineering Academy podcast. What's going on, Mark?
Hey, loving life. Things are good.
Welcome back.
Glad to be here with you again. Yep.
So today, I wanted to dive into a topic. I recently went on a conference, went out to a location in Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth, with some coworkers. Some of the things that we talked about came up is kind of which areas of engineering have the highest paid salaries. And the reason why that came up is because we're all transmission engineers that were going to this. We were going to a conference called TS-DOS in Dallas. And we just, it was a curious topic because not a lot of people know about this industry that we are in. And I'm sure there's other industries within the other disciplines that maybe not a lot of engineers, civil engineers specifically, know that they can go into. And so we did a little bit of research today. And so we want to talk about some of the salaries within each of the disciplines of civil engineering, and also talk about some of the offshoots of engineering within civil engineering that kind of come up. So that's kind of a broad topic, but everyone cares about salaries at some level as you start diving into engineering. So
yeah, everybody cares about the salaries. Well, you want me to go first here then, Isaac? Let's talk about geotechnical engineers.
Yeah.
So those guys, we've looked on ZipRecruiter as our primary source for information here, but they're at about $83,000 a year, Isaac, for the average across the United States. So obviously that's mixing in all of the geographical locations. As we've talked about salaries before, and typically regions that are probably coastal regions, you get over onto the East Coast, salaries tend to be a little bit higher. West Coast, right? A little bit higher. And kind of the beltway right there in the middle, the meat of the country, salaries tend to be a little bit lower. But the cost of living is also a little bit lower in those areas, right?
Yep.
But now, the geotech engineers were averaging about $83,000 a year,
which I don't think is too bad. Actually,
no, that's great,
pretty good.
That's really good.
The reason why some of these numbers and figures come from ZipRecruiter is because ZipRecruiter, from what I've discovered, is pretty much an open door. You don't have to sign into anything. You don't have to have membership to anything, and like a lot of other platforms.
Yeah.
So ZipRecruiter has been very nice. They just give you the data. So there
Yeah.
you go.
Give
So
a plug to ZipRecruiter.
as we go through these, we'll go through and talk about, according to what their data shows, what is the least paying discipline and what is the most paying discipline. But one of the things I think should also be tagged onto this might be stress level. So, Mark, what do you think about Geotech and stress level attached to 83K? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I would say that it's probably on the lower side if we were to like create a spectrum of stress levels, and maybe 5 is right in the middle and 10 is the max and 1 is the least. And again, I'm not a geotechnical engineer, but I've worked with a lot of them. I think I have a sense for what they put up with and the stress levels. I'd put them down in that 3 kind of a range would be my guess.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
that's our opinion. I'm sure we'll get
that's our opinion.
hate mail and comments from the Geo guys.
Yeah, I'm sure there's others that would have higher.
What are you talking about?
That's my sense of where those guys are at.
All right. Well, let's dive into our water resource engineers. And maybe I'll talk about this. So in our research on this one, water resource engineers average about 80K in the United States. And again, that's, depending on which location you are in the United States, that's either up or down. But within the US, you're making about 80K on average.
That's
pretty
bad.
good.
That's really good. And again, I would put the stress level for these guys. And Isaac, you might know more, drainage, sewer, water distribution systems type engineers, but I would put their stress level in that, 3 range again.
Yeah, I did a quick internship doing environmental engineering. I also did an internship at a water resources firm. And, every job is obviously going to have some stress to it. But I think you're right. And a lot of these engineering disciplines that deal with water, you get a lot of business from the local entities and the
municipalities, right?
that you're working with, or canals companies, water companies that are within that that specific area. So you get to really know your customer really well. I mean, there's obviously nationwide big companies that work on big projects too. I imagine if you're working on a dam, that's probably going to be pretty stressful to make sure everything's good there, because we've heard about some dams failing before.
Yeah.
So,
okay,
maybe a dam engineer is pretty stressful. But 80K for your water resource engineers. And in fact, of all of the engineering disciplines that we dive into, the water resource has the lowest average in the United States. So just put that out there.
Yep, that's right. Next, we're talking about transportation engineers, right? So, transportation engineers can also incorporate structures, right? These sometimes transportation and structural get mixed up a little bit, although within transportation engineering, they do try to isolate those two. So if you have these bigger design firms, or even the smaller ones, they have the guys that stick with the roadway design, and that's kind of their bread and butter. And then they usually have structural engineers on staff that are doing the culverts and obviously the bridges and figuring out those things. So there's kind of some crossover even within that transportation discipline. But those guys are coming in at about 88,000 per year average across the U.S. And
I don't know, Isaac. I thought that was high.
It's nice. That's a nice wage. And where would you think their stress levels are going to be in the spectrum?
Oh, that's a good question.
I know some transportation engineers, and it depends on, if they're on some bigger design build type projects where they're really getting pushed to meet deadlines, and there's some pressure on them. There's some stress. I put these guys in the 5 to 6 kind of a range. What
I would as well. I know a few in the transportation industry, and the deadlines are a bit stressful to hit. Budgets kind of come and goes. They're tied with federal dollars, so you kind of have to balance that out. But so I agree with you
yeah,
on the stress level. So, but 88K for
yeah,
transportation. That according to our research here, that brings it in as the second most paying
yeah,
discipline.
yeah.
So not bad.
No, not bad at all. These guys make decent money.
Next up is our structural engineers, and they are coming in at about 84K average in the United States.
Yeah,
This is kind of a funny topic because I think most civil engineers, as they go through school, I'm willing to bet that most of them think that they're probably going to head towards structural engineering. Like if you think of civil engineering, usually you think of bridges and buildings,
right, right,
you're designing structures. And so
right.
you kind of go into school thinking that that's what you want to do. But they're not the highest paid engineering discipline. What's your thoughts?
No, they're not. And so structural engineering it's interesting because, like I mentioned, the guys that do the bridges and the structures that are associated with infrastructure, right, our transportation systems, our roads, and our highways. Those guys are kind of over in with the transportation dudes. They're kind of specialized in that type of structure,
Mm-hmm.
those bridges. And then there's and so those structural engineers tend to work with the transportation engineering firms, but then the engineers that do buildings that people live in and office spaces and structures that are actual dwellings, right, or places of business, or even public gathering spaces. There's stadiums and those kinds of things that we kind of all get together for our entertainment. Those guys are kind of a separate discipline within the structural engineering community, and those guys tend to have their own specialty firms that just concentrate on buildings.
Hmm.
And so there's kind of a little bit of a crossover there, but there's a really large contingency of engineers that are structural engineers that they just focus on buildings, and they're average that 84K kind of range in across the United States. Not a bad wage, and they're they get very specialized. So within the building and construction industry, there's different systems, and these guys that are structural engineers, they tend to like gravitate towards one system. You'll have a structural engineer that'll maybe be more adept at concrete design, for example, or you might have a guy that likes steel design, and there's guys that can do it all. But it's my experience that these guys tend to like to focus on a particular material or structural system that they really like, and their firms kind of say, well, so and so, he's the expert in our concrete design, or
Still connections.
yeah, and the steel, our best steel designer is that lady over there. She's really good at it, and so they tend to specialize a little bit like that. But and some of them like to design in timber, right, wood structures and masonry, and but they tend to specialize a little bit because
I guess what surprises me is that it's this salary range for structural is coming in like towards the middle. It's not the highest.
Yeah.
And so civil engineers that think they're going coming in and designing buildings, it's typically not the highest. It's not listed as the highest average. So
Well,
I think
and
that's
it's
kind of surprising.
sometimes it's a tough business too, Isaac. I mean, the structural engineering firms that I work with, I mean, they're usually bidding, work. They're proposing on projects through architects, right? So they have good relationships with local architects. And an owner comes to the architect with a big project that they want built, and the structural engineer is proposing to that architect to market their services, right? And so there's always pressure because there's competing structural firms that might have lower prices. And so it's a pretty competitive business. They're trying to establish a value that they can provide. Sometimes that means they think that their design is going to be cheaper than anybody else's, right? Our design, or we're going to be able to get a little more aggressive than the other guys, or we feel like we can save you in this and this and this area. And then our detailing is better. So once this structure gets built or it's in construction, you're going to have less problems, those kind of things. In fact, structural engineers that I work with, they come to me for endorsements a lot of times, because I build the projects, and so they want my opinion to be given to an owner as to how they have saved money on a project because their design was better. It was better detailed, more efficient,
Interesting.
fill in the blank. So it's a pretty competitive environment for structural engineering firms.
So you're going to know more on this, but what would you rank stress level for structural?
These guys deal with deadlines, and they get into some stressful situations. But I'd put them in the same rank as probably the transportation engineers, in that 5 to 6 kind of a range. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yep.
Good to know. Let's jump to our next one, which is construction. Now, construction takes the cake for the highest average, and that's coming in at $89K, the average in the United States. Again, location dependent will change that price that you're going to make there, or your salary. But construction's coming in at $89K. So that takes the cake. That's the leader for the in terms of salary levels at an average in the United States. And Mark, this is probably more in line with what you have going on. And so maybe you can talk about that, maybe the stress, stress level.
Yeah, that average is a little higher on this one because the stress levels are a little bit higher. You're dealing directly with owners if you're working for a general contractor and trying to meet deadlines, and you're trying to hit budgets. You're trying to make sure all of your construction systems have been engineered and sequenced, into the project properly. And you're just you got a lot of things that you're juggling at once, and so the stress levels are a little bit higher on this one. Isaac, I'd put this up in the 8 range, for a construction engineer.
So it's tied, it is tied to a higher salary. So that's got that going for it. But, and I think there's a lot of transitional periods probably, if somebody's in being a structural engineer, they can jump into construction and as they get to know that arena. So a lot of times there is some fluidity between your discipline. And we also talk about some offshoot disciplines within engineering that aren't necessarily falling under one of the 5 categories that we talk about here. But construction seems like a good one. It's a little higher stress, but they pay you more for it. So that's what you're going to get with construction.
That's right. That's right.
So offshoots that we kind of came up with for people in the civil engineering world. An offshoot would be a project manager. Becoming a project manager in engineering is one that we looked up. That's also very high in terms of an average. So that's coming in at $90K average in the United States. So that's project manager engineering. That's right. And that's probably Do you think that is squarely on what you're doing?
Yeah, I think that would describe what I do typically. So I'm responsible for not only managing, excuse me, projects, but I'm responsible for all of the engineering that has to happen to pull off the project, right?
Yep.
So yes, I put that in that category.
And probably in line with the stress level of construction, somewhere in that 8 range.
Excuse me, but yeah, I would put that right in that same range, I think.
I don't want you choking on me.
Yeah. Something went down the wrong pipe. I'll be all right.
All right. Well, we've got 2 more here, and we'll wrap this up. But some of the other offshoots that we could think about is one of them is specifically what I do, which is transmission line engineering. ZipRecruiter lists that as about an 83K average, so in that middle ballpark of the other disciplines. Transmission line engineering can be a hodgepodge of different disciplines. If you're a structural engineer, you can be good at this. If you're geotech, you can be good at it. It kind of incorporates a couple different things. Even in the companies I've worked for, we've had electrical engineers be transmission line engineers as well, because they bring kind of that experience to the table. But I will say, my own experience is that when you do work for an energy or a utility company, you can do really well with that. And so my experience is that it is a good industry to go into. So transmission line engineering, I would say it's not as stressful as construction at all, although we do prepare documents for construction and work very closely with construction to make sure everything's done. The other thing is transmission line engineers deal with projects that can scale quite highly in dollar figures very quickly. I mean, a steel pole can get very expensive, and when you're designing miles and miles and miles of transmission line, these are millions of dollars worth of pole and wire and everything else. So it gets really expensive really quickly on those jobs. So, but I'd probably rank it around a 5 or 4, okay, somewhere in there.
Okay.
It's not as stressful, I think, as a construction type job. Yeah. Another one we thought about is a sales engineer, which is kind of an offshoot. You can go into that area and you're selling. What are you selling if you're a sales engineer?
Yeah, it's such a broad, area of engineering, sales engineering. Usually these are guys that are selling some kind of engineered system that can be used in construction, in building things. So, shoring systems, that could be earth shoring systems, that could be, geotextiles, some kind of geotechnical product that helps projects get built. I see a lot of sales engineers that sell specifically engineered, culverts and panelized systems that, help, channel water or get bridges, built over waterways easier. There's a whole area of sales engineering that just sales and markets those products.
And I've been in transmission and the utility world. We get the sales engineers as well, and they come and they'll talk about the new products that they've got in development, whether it's conductor or steel poles that they want you to buy from the manufacturer or anything like that.
Yeah. So these guys are usually traveling a lot, right? And they're going into everybody. Like I was approached by a sales engineer just the other day with a product that I'm seriously considering using on one of my projects. It completely gets rid of something we call a pourback strip. That's something that's required for post-tension concrete construction. And it's a really interesting product. It looks really viable, and it looks like it can save me some money. And so this sales engineer, he's out of California, actually, reached out to me, and he's going to fly out and sit down with me and see if his product will address my problem.
Yep.
And from what I've seen, it's probably going to do a pretty good job. So that's just an example. But these guys are usually guys that are traveling around a lot. They work for the manufacturer, whatever this engineered product is that they're trying to sell, and they just help with their engineering background, right? They can help sell their product.
Questions.
Yeah.
Sell the product.
Yep.
Yeah. They typically take people out for dinners, and you do travel a lot.
There's some golf. There's some golf
involved.
Yeah.
But for them, did we talk about the average sales engineer is around 81K? So,
yes, 81K.
Yeah, it's not the lowest actually of the disciplines we've talked about, but
no,
it's right there. And their upside, is usually tied to product sales. So if they're selling lots, you're gonna probably make lots.
Yeah, I tend to. These guys are the engineers that maybe have a little more. Engineers don't, and I guess it's kind of a stereotype that we've been pegged with. But they're usually not people. They don't have good people skills, but maybe these sales engineers are the engineers that have a little better people skills, or they like to talk to people and interface with people a lot more than, say the engineer that just likes to be in his cubicle, grinding out calculations, all day,
Yep.
Just fit a different personality type, I guess, is what I'll say.
Yeah. And I'm sure there are many other offshoots of engineering that we might not have thought of, but those are ones we quickly just, wanted to talk about. So.
There definitely is. That's, and we've talked about that before, Isaac, but that's what's cool about civil engineering is it's just like, it's such a broad field. And, with a civil engineering degree, it doesn't matter who you are. There's going to be a job that like fits your personality, fits your lifestyle, fits your interests. It's just a really cool field to be in. It's just cool that way. So
cool. Well, Mark, thanks for jumping on with me, talking about salaries again. This time we get a little more specific with each discipline and kind of give our thoughts on that. So appreciate the time.
You bet. Anytime.
Okay. See you next time.
Okay.
Bye.